Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined with co-founder of Last Night's Game, Amy Siegfried. Amy, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this conversation. But before we get started, just do me a favor and introduce yourself to the listeners. In your own words, who is Amy today?
That's a complicated onion there, Dan. Lots to unwind. Amy Siegfried, founder of Last Night's Game, which I run with my brother. I worked in the world of sports and realized that I had such an advantage working in sports, knowing about sports, and that helped me with my career. And I wanted to provide that same opportunity to those who don't know a lot about sports, but still need to talk about them in social situations. And I very much believe that sports is just another tool in your tool belt of success. It's something to help you go into a networking event or on a date or to a holiday party and be prepared to just talk to anyone about anything. And that's why we watch the news, right? Partially. And so that is the longer story short of Last Night's Game. I'm also an adjunct professor. I'm a mom. I'm a sister. I'm a daughter. All the other things too. So lots of moving parts over here at the home office of Last Night's Game.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, how did Last Night's Game come about? Because you guys aren't like your typical, sports blog or, podcast or, website. I mean, you definitely have a different twist. So tell me a little bit about how, the concept of it came about. Were you and Scott just sitting around one night like, hey, let's do this? Or how did it come about?
I mean, kind of at the end, yes. So I was, probably 20 years old, and I was an intern for the Arizona Diamondbacks. And I was at a game with one of my girlfriends, and the guys were running off the field. And she said, what's going on? I said, they have 3 outs. And she said, what's an out? And I realized that there was no problem. Everyone's smart at their own thing, right? But I realized that she works in this male-dominated industry. She worked in manufacturing. And I thought, what an advantage she could have if she could relate to some of the coworkers on the floor, in the break room, whatever that might be. And I thought to myself, there's so much more to sports than the box score. That is so boring. We don't talk that way. You and I don't sit down and say, oh, I love these cookies from this place. This cookie has 300 calories. No, we don't talk like that.
Right.
And so that's not how people really talk sports either. And so I had this idea, like, let's figure out how to share this information. I call my brother, and mind you, this was a long time ago. I was 20, quite some time ago. And I said, hey, I have this idea. Let's figure out how to share like the really great things about sports with people who need to learn it. I think it could be such an advantage. And he was like, Amy, I'm in high school. You work 80 hours a week. So where would we have time to do that? And I was like, valid point. Okay. And obviously the website creation tools and email blasts, those things didn't exist for a normal average human as they do now. And so sort of tabled it. And I continued to work in my job. I ended up leaving baseball, going into a couple other jobs, moving to Singapore with my boyfriend, now husband, moving to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And when we moved to Tulsa, I'd been looking for a job for about 3 months once we knew we were moving, and I couldn't find anything. And we arrived right before Thanksgiving. And I thought, okay, no one's going to hire between Thanksgiving and New Year's because it's such a tough time. So at Thanksgiving dinner, I said, hey, what do you remember that idea we had like 14 years ago? What do you think about that? What if we just do it? I mean, I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it is, but kind of make it easy. And so we started Last Night's Game. And I mean, it was definitely creating a website and doing all the things. When you work in a corporate world, you can hand off legal, you can hand off graphic design, you can hand off accounting. When you start your own thing, you are all the things. You are the IT department and all the things, as you know. And so but we got it going and got it up and running. And so, and like the book Lean Startup says, if your first product wasn't ugly, then you've launched too late. And our first product was ugly. And it was a Gmail email that went out with a link to a website, which was all I could figure out was how to make that like one page landing page and duplicate it on the back end. But it's been a lot of fun, and it's evolved from that to, we obviously have reader-driven content on our website, a podcast. We are a tri-weekly email publication as well. So it's been a lot of fun. It's fun to work with him. He works full-time elsewhere and with us part-time, but it's been a really great journey. And sure, it's stressful. Sure, there's a lot of moving parts to it, but what an incredible opportunity it is. And I've learned so much in this role, so much more than I probably would even say about my first job. And so it's been incredible.
Yeah. What was that like, the difference of, going from being, an employee to an entrepreneur, and, again, start up literally from scratch. Like I said, you were everything. You were IT, you were, the garbage man, whatever it had to
Mm-hmm.
be was you. So,
Mm-hmm.
tell me the shift, and, you know, how did you get through it? I mean, how did you deal with some of those obstacles that I'm sure you had no plan for? Like there's always a plan, but then there's all these other, shifts. I mean, what's Mike Tyson say? Everybody has a plan until you get
Yep.
punched in the face, right?
Yep.
So, so that first time you got punched in the face, how, what was your reaction?
Gosh, there were so many. And I think there were so many opportunities to learn. And I guess we really adopted when we moved to Singapore because there are a lot of things that were out of your control. It is what it is. And so my husband and I use that a lot. Sometimes it's just, there are things you can't control. And so there were some things where like, it is what it is. We've got to go figure this out. I don't know what this looks like. I don't know how to do this. I mean, spent a lot of time on YouTube and all those other things, just figuring some of those things out. But there's some things like your attorney or your accountant that I'm not going to rely on YouTube for some of those things. And so, but it is a shift, and it's a shift because if you don't do it, no one else is. And so there's a plus and minus to that, right? I mean, in the back end, no one knows your plan to roll out X, Y, Z. So if things hit the fan, you can shift accordingly. But also no one's going to push that forward. No one's going to push you to do it. And so that was really a shift of going from being the activator and making everything happen versus in a corporate world or in a job with other people are also relying on you, but they're also driving you to make decisions, and you're all working together as a team and you have those drivers, where when it's basically just you're responsible for all those things. And so that was a whole different shift. And I find in talking to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I have a friend who actually went to be a marketing coach for entrepreneurs, and she said, I can't tell you how much of my day job is just getting people to stay on task. That is sort of because when it's just you as well, there's so many things flying at you. You need to do this ad. You need to take care of this. You need to call this person back. What about this return from your merch store? You got to handle that. All these different pieces that are being thrown at you, and you're tackling all of those. And so you really, truly have to learn. Priority is really a key thing. And I've learned to torture myself and get everything I don't like to do done in the morning, because otherwise it just sits on that to-do list. And I'm like, I don't really want to edit the podcast today because that sounds painful. And so it's as you know, it's a whole nother dynamic, and there's no days off. And that is another thing. I think people think, oh, entrepreneurs, this sounds so great. They can work from anywhere. You can do this and that. And yes, you can work from anywhere, but you have to work from anywhere because that's what you do. And so I think in the past, gosh, we're coming on, I think 7 years. I think I've taken like 2 days off, maybe, because we went to Cuba and the internet was terrible there. So I couldn't do that. And I worked even when I had a baby. I had an infant, and someone was writing for about 3 weeks, but I was still in there approving, putting things together. And so it has its pluses and minuses. I mean, there's wonderful things about it, and there's also challenges.
Right. So you, you worked in a lot of male dominated industries prior to this. How did that help you in launching, what you're doing now?
I think partially because I was always the outsider in a conversation. So I kind of knew how to steer for me, how to make things work for me. And so an example being when we first started, someone set me up with someone really high up at AP Sports. And I went for a drink with this guy when I happened to be where this office was located on the East Coast. And he started talking to me about like the 1972 Boston Red Sox. And I don't know anything about there you go. I know nothing about the 1972 Boston Red Sox. I've been to Fenway. I think Boston's a great city, and I could talk about that. And so that's how I started to turn that conversation, because I didn't know what to do with this. How am I going to last through a glass of wine talking about this? I have no idea. And so it was very much, okay, well, let's talk about Boston. What did you love about Boston? Where'd you like to eat? Where'd you live? What's your favorite thing when you're at Wrigley? What's the best part? And of course, the Green Monster is the answer to that. But that was really how I saw how I had to shift my own personal conversations. That way, even knowing what I know, and it to me is how it's how I drive what we write, it's how I drive what we include, because I am kind of a product of what we do, because I don't have a chance to watch ESPN all the time. Sure, I have football on sometimes, and but I played sports for one season. I played soccer and I was terrible. I got kicked in the face. I was awful. And so I know what I know because of my brother. And so for me, I'm am the product of our business, because I'm still learning and thinking, oh, this is really interesting. This would be great to talk about at a holiday party, or when you were dating, I was like, oh God, this is a really fun nugget to drop in that can open up a conversation and not take it down too much of a road of too sporty, and it bridges into travel or things like that. And that's the great part about sports, is it's very versatile. You can really factor in, if you want to talk about celebrity gossip or food, all those things intertwine. And so that was what I really appreciate about the world of sports.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love as well. And I mean, I always talk about how, sports allow you to teach life lessons. And, if there's been one of the biggest blessings about what Sandy and I do, traveling around the country and, living full time in an RV is, the opportunity that I've had to be able to sit down and reconnect with a lot of the players I've coached throughout the years. And, you know, if we sit down and have, dinner and then come out to the RV and sit around for another hour or so. And, maybe we're together for 2.5 hours. Maybe they'll come to a campsite that we're at or something like that. But the time that we're actually talking about a game that we had played in is so minimal. It's always about, the trip to the game, or, what happened, in the hotel room at one of the tournaments we'd traveled to, or, stuff like that. And I think that is what's so cool about it is, it's the conversation starter, but it's not what it revolves around. It's the
Right.
connector. And I think that's what's so cool about it. The sports is the connector. So, you mentioned about, your own athletic career was short-lived, you know,
Mm-hmm.
1 year playing soccer. Um, but in that 1 year, what were some of the things that you learned about life from playing on that one season playing soccer and getting kicked in the face?
I learned I was probably better off just to stick to dancing. There was that. Uh, I mean, this is a conversation my husband and we have a 4-year-old about the things that the involvement in team sports. I mean, this is exactly it, where you're really learning how you don't get everything your way. I mean, I remember voting for our team name, and we were red and white. And my friend and I wanted to be the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I don't know why that was the team we wanted our soccer team to be. And I don't even remember what was picked, but it wasn't that. And it was one of those where it starts there, right? It starts at that baseline of, this is your identity, and you're going to have to figure out how to live with it, and the teamwork, and how things aren't fair. My mom tells a story about one game I was apparently just inconsolable afterwards, because there was a handball and all these different things that the refs didn't call, and we lost. And I was just like, this isn't fair. And she's like, this is what happens. Life isn't fair. And I mean, same could go for, the cheerleader in high school, but I tried out for the cheerleading squad for 3 years before I made it. And so it's those things in sports where you learn that you have to shift. Things are going to change. Things are not going to go the way you want them to. And you've got to learn that it's okay to be sad, but you've got to pick yourself up and keep going. And so I think those are a lot of opportunities, a lot of lessons that come from participation in group anything, right? Whether that's theater or sports. And so I find that you learn how to work. You learn how to work as a team, and you learn that you are not maybe the most important thing that's happening right there, that you do things for the betterment of the team and the growth of everyone, and rising tides raise all ships.
Right. Yeah. And everybody's got their roles, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's something that can translate into the business world so well is, you've got the defensive player, in soccer, you got the defensive players, you got the offensive players, and even they have different roles as well. You've got forwards, you've got, midfielders, the whole 9 yards. And that all translates to business, because
Absolutely.
are part of a team. You
Absolutely.
you go into business, you're part of a team, even though you're now, the
Mhm,
quote unquote quarterback or whatever you want to call it. There's still a team around you that you have to be
mhm,
able to, function and
mhm.
work with. So I interrupted you. You were about to say something.
No, I was just going to say I teach an entrepreneurship class at the University of Oklahoma, and I talk a lot to my students about how you build that team and how a diverse team. You can't have four quarterbacks. That's not going to do anybody any good. You have to select people who are different than you, have different skill sets, and that means they're going to probably think a bit differently than you, and you're going to have to learn to work with that. And that's hard because we all like to hang out with people who are like us and that we get along with, but that makes us such a better team if we are diverse in our skill sets and our belief systems, all the things in our backgrounds. And so it's you're right, it's so true. You really truly have to, everyone has to bring their piece to the table.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I used to always tell, all of my players at some point in life, the sport itself is going to pass you by, no matter
Mhm.
how good you are, whether, you're good enough to go on and play in college, whether you're good enough to go on and play professionally, whether that's minor leagues or independent ball or, going to major league baseball. But at some point, the game's going to say, I'm done with you. And you're now, going to be sitting in a job interview, and whoever you're talking to isn't going to care how well you could throw a fastball or throw a curveball or what your launch angle was or any of that sort of stuff. They're going to want to know, how are you going to be able to contribute to this team that you're now
Mhm.
interviewing for this position for, and help us be successful. And
Yep.
that was something I stressed all the time to those guys, is that, it does not matter how good you are at some point or another. Um, you know, the game's going to end. Yeah, so you
Mhm.
still have to take
Absolutely.
what you learned from it and be able to present it to someone that's going to, how are you going to help me now? You
Right.
know,
How are you going to translate that? And that, I mean, that's a challenge, is to translate that leadership and translate that experience and put it into a resume, right? And put it into an interview. And from some of the time I spent with folks who have come out of the military, that's hard to translate those skills and put them into something that is resonates on a resume. And so I think everyone has that challenge in translating their experience, but I find some of those things are just so much more challenging to do, but they're so integral to what makes you a successful member of a team.
yep, yep. And I would oftentimes use a story about me and my mom, where I'd worked a baseball camp, and Dickie Knowles, who was a member of the 1980 Philadelphia Phillies World Championship team, worked the camp with me. And I was just, you know, I'm still like a kid in a candy store whenever I, meet a big leaguer, especially someone, I'm a Red Sox fan, but I'm from the Philly area. So the 80 Phillies team, the Phillies were always my National League team. So, that team was very, very close to my heart. I knew all the players. So here I am, I'm working a camp right next to Dickie Knowles. I'm all jazzed up about it. And, I'm probably in my, mid to late 30s at this point, and I'm talking to my mom on the phone. I was, living in Pennsylvania. She's living in Florida, and I'm, you know, start telling her, like, you'll never guess who I, worked this baseball camp with this week. And, we're going back and forth. And, finally I said, Dickie Knowles. And she goes, oh, I know Dickie Knowles. And I was just like, what are you talking about? And, not that Dickie Knowles is a very common name. It's not like I was,
Mhm.
I was working with Mike Smith or something, So I'm like, what are you talking about, Mom? How do you know Dickie Knowles? And Dickie was the EAP director with the Phillies at that time. So, anybody with any type of substance abuse issues, Dickie was the guy to go to. He himself was in recovery at that point. My mom, her second career was as a drug and alcohol counselor. And she starts telling me that she would have lunch every year at a conference with Dickie Knowles at this, drug and alcohol, counselors conference. And I was just blown away. And I'm like, wait a second, are we talking about the same guy? Again, not like Dickie Knowles is such a common name, but I'm like, he at that time, I'm like, he's one of, 40 men who has a Philadelphia Phillies world championship ring. you know? And she blew me away. She's like, I do remember him saying something about playing baseball. at some point. But and it just kind of it really stopped me because I'm like, wow, this is exactly what I'm telling all my players. Because my mom could have given two iotas that
Mm-hmm.
Dickie had a World Series ring. He was just a colleague, of hers that they could share information and experiences from, once a year at by having lunch together, or a couple phone calls, out of the blue. And it was just like, wow, like you've literally just proven to me what I've been telling
Exactly,
players all
exactly.
these years. It
Moms
did
know
not matter.
everything.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. So it's like, all right, that's a story I can use down the road for
Yep,
sure.
that was fantastic, and it's so true, so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Because again, it doesn't, at some point it doesn't matter. What you did on the field doesn't matter. It's what you can bring to people, after that and off the field. So the relationship with you and your brother, um, you know, starting this together. And again, we talked about your short-lived athletic career, but then you also talked about one of your ways to kind of connect with him, even though you were no longer a, quote unquote athlete, was through sports. So talk a little bit about that, that relationship and that how that kind of helped you guys develop a bond.
Well, my brother is and was my first person, right? I mean, we're almost 6 years difference, and we just grew up together. He's my favorite travel buddy. Don't tell my husband that. But I really enjoy. I just enjoy experiencing life with him because we have so many things in common, but we have so many things that are different. And he played every sport that was you could think of, and you have to go to those things. And so between dance classes, I would be at baseball games and basketball games and volleyball and roller hockey and everything else. In college, he played rugby. So I learned about rugby a little bit, not much because it's a little different of a sport, but I really enjoy that. And I think that's something that we continue to be a baseline of conversation with us. He was always that guy that I'd be sitting on the couch watching a baseball game or something going, what just happened there? I don't understand. And he would always be so patient and explain it to me. And he speaks sports, he eats and breathes sports. And so it's so fun to watch him get so excited about something that he is so knowledgeable about. And so it's been fun to work together and fun to have this as a continuer connector to enhance that sports relationship. And when I worked in baseball, we went to the All-Star game in San Francisco together, and we've done all these different activities and gone to different things. We went to Stanley Cup. I was like 6 months pregnant. We went to the Stanley Cup finals. I think game 3, we're from Las Vegas, and so went to the Golden Knights game, and just a cool thing that we have in common that we like to do together.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's again, it's one of those bonds that can really grow deep for sure. So, um, what with last night's game, as you kind of went through this, you know, all these growing pains of getting the site up and you know doing that sort of stuff, how did you go about building the team to what you currently have today?
Well, we're still pretty small and mighty, and it's basically just the two of us, and we have someone helps us with social media, but mostly just LinkedIn and Facebook. He does Twitter, I do Instagram. And so we've built that up, and there are definitely some challenges that come with that, and the workload that is. We brought on interns a couple of times. I went for my MBA to Notre Dame, and so I've been working with them to use interns for the past couple of years, and that's pretty much been it. There's a hang up in a sense, or it's your business, you're challenged with, do you want to take on staff because you are then responsible for someone else's family, someone else's bills, whatever that might be. And so that becomes a challenge, right? That's something that we've talked a lot about. So we've really opted for contract workers to help us grow the business as opposed to bring anybody on full time. And so that's sort of how we've grown this team. And we continue to rely on ambassadors and our friends who are out there in the community and who are our biggest fans for a lot of feedback. They're really great at relaying information. It's funny, I have a couple of friends that will just share reels or different things on Instagram that are sports related, knowing that I'll catch them from them or they'll send them to me. And so we're small but mighty, and we really do have an army behind us, um, even though we're a small staff.
Yeah. And yeah, so I mean that's incredibly important to have all those, contributors, so to say, to kind of help,
Mhm.
push you guys along. Um, is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to, bring up to the listeners that you think would be important to them?
Well, I get a lot when I do different speaking engagements. I get a lot about just like, how do you get started? And I mean, as you probably know, starting a podcast and starting your journey that you two are on, you just kind of have to do it, and you figure it out, and know that it's not going to be pretty up front. You're going to figure it out. It's going to be messy, and I think we live in such a Instagram world, if you will, of everything's pretty, everything's perfect, and it's not going to be, and that's totally okay. That's part of the journey. That's what makes it perfect, is the learning opportunity. So there's no ideal time to do anything monumental in life, whether that's start a business, have a child, pick up and take off on a journey for unknown like yours. There's no opportune time. There's always something that's going to be a question mark. And so I would say the biggest thing to do is do a little research, but also don't get hung up on it and just go for it. And that's kind of the route we took. And the reason I also took kind of talking about staffing, and there are multiple routes to do things, but I really wanted to start this and not spend a lot of money up front. That was a huge thing for me because I had worked with clients that spent a ton of money up front to start a business and didn't reap the benefits of it. And I didn't want to put the 10,000, 30,000, whatever dollars, insert dollar amount here, in to make that happen. And that's made our progress a bit slower. And I will fully admit that. But that was something that was really important to me. And you find out what works for you. And I think that is the biggest thing when you start a business, is you just have to trust your gut. So I would say that is a huge thing. And then my other thing about starting a business is I do quite a bit of angel investing and consulting with startups. And I actually had one today, and I said, what's your differentiator? What makes you different? And so for us, that is, we're short and sweet. We cover sports in a conversational way. Our email blasts are 3 minutes, our podcasts are 5 minutes. And that to me is hugely important. And that's my differentiator. I cover all sports. I don't cover just women's sports or just men's sports or vice versa. And so that's one thing when you think about starting a business, what makes you different. And so those would be my sort of takeaways if someone is listening and really thinking about how do I make this leap. And those were the things that I would say I would do.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my first blogs when we decided to do this was titled, every journey begins with the first step. And, again, you get to that point where it's like, you can debate with yourself all the reasons why not to do it, why it doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
sense, why it's not going to work. Um, you know, but at some point you just got to pull the trigger and
Mm-hmm.
make that first step and do it. And for us, it was when we actually put our house on the market. When the sign went in the yard, then it was like, okay, this is real. Like this
I
is
bet you got kind of sweaty though. You were like, okay, what are we sure we want to do this?
then I tell everybody the story, so many times. Like the day we were sitting in the RV dealership was the day, it was March 20th, 2020, the day that the governor of Pennsylvania was issuing the shutdown orders. And we were actually taking our house off the market at that point because we didn't want it to look like a stale listing and real estate was shutting down. But it still felt right at that point. It's like, what, we're going to move forward with this and it's all going to work out, and it has. But you got to take that first step, and like you said, you may trip with that first step. It's like a baby learning how to walk. They're
Right.
a fall down, they get back up and they keep taking steps. And that's very very much the same with business. You just got to keep moving forward, keep
Yeah.
one step after another. And you fall
And
down, you just pick yourself up.
fail forward is what I always say. Like, it's okay to fail. Learn from it and pick up and go do something with it. So fail forward. And that, I think we're also afraid of failing, but failing isn't a bad thing. And so I would say that on top of exactly what you said is, you're going to trip, you're going to have missteps, but you just keep going. It'll all work itself out. Keep hustling, keep doing what you do, and make sure to give yourself some grace too.
Yep. Yeah. The only real failure is if you don't learn from it.
That's exactly it.
I had a fellow coach of mine who used to always say, we're either winning or learning, winning or
I
learning.
like
So
that.
when we lose, we're learning. That's all there is to it. So it's
I like that a lot.
Amy, how do people find out more about what you're doing? How do they sign up for the newsletter, find the podcasts? Where can they find you guys out on the internet?
So we're at lastnightsgame.com and we are on all major social platforms. I am the person who answers all the DMs, everything on Instagram. So if you want to connect, please go ahead and send me a message. I'm on there all the time. But we're also on other platforms. And then the podcast itself is on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. And you can find those links to everything, including the sign up on our website at lastnightsgame.com.
Cool. Amy, that brings us to our final question. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things, then the whole world changes. So it's one of the little things that Amy does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place.
I thought a lot about this, and for me, it's really truly trying to feed into or empower somebody else. And I started that because I realized I had some really crappy bosses along the way, as most people have. And I realized that women tend to not have the mentors sort of relationship that men have. And so to really invest in the young people in our community, I mean, that's the beautiful part about teaching a college class is being available. And if it's look at a resume, if it's just, hey, you guys are doing a great job, I think you're smart what you're doing. But also it's things like I work with startups. I just had one today where it's I give 30-minute sessions. It's like, hey, what can I help you with? You want to learn how to build the team? Great, let's talk about it. You learn how to spend a small amount of money to put up your ads. And that to me is so important because I think there's so much information out there, but sometimes you need that personal touch. You need someone to talk through it. And it feels good for all of us to have someone believe in us, right? And have someone encourage us. And I think that's so important to do so and to not let the world beat us down, but also help build people up. And so that is something, I really try to do, whether that's truly asking someone at the grocery store, the checker, how are you doing? And listening and being present on all those perspectives, but really feeding into those who take care of you. So that would be my thought of just, I try every day to do the best I can to provide that uplift and check in on friends and all the things, whatever that might be, that little extra step that just says, hey, I'm thinking about you. I want you to succeed.
Yep. Love that. I love that. And that is one of those little things that's very important and goes a long way. So I love that answer. For folks out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com or danclouser.com. While you're there, pick up a copy of my most recent book, The Journey of My Mother's Son, Volume 1. And Amy, thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed this conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Dan.